Welcome aboard the podcast of the Stoic Pirate and our quest for the treasure of the good life. Here's your host, Matt Mueller.
Hooah! Dear pirates, philosophers, heretics, thinkers, and humanists. Welcome aboard the ship of the Stoic Pirate and on our quest for the treasure of the good life. My name is Matt and I am the host of the podcast The Stoic Pirate. Today we're going to talk about mental toughness and how the difference between a top athlete and an average one is quite often found in the area of mental skills. Joining me as a guest is Dr. Kevin Willis from Charlottesville, Virginia, the United States of America. Kevin is a performance psychologist and one of the leading mental coaches in North American ice hockey. You will see what applies to ice hockey players in the area of mental toughness also applies to people in all other professional fields. So, enjoy the discussion with performance psychologist Dr. Kevin Willis.
Yes, hello Kevin. I'm really pleased to have you here. Kevin Willis, performance psychologist from Virginia. Really happy that you joined the Stoic Pirate podcast for today. And we're going to talk about your specialty, and that's ice hockey and mental, the importance of mental coaching, sports psychology in ice hockey. So,
well, it's great to be here. Appreciate you inviting me.
You're welcome. You published a book in 2019, which I read. It's called, it's titled Hockey, Grit, Grind, and Mind. I really like that book a lot. It's very comprehensive. It's a very good read. But the first question I have is, as I said, the title is Hockey Grit. So what is grit? How would you explain grit, and why is grit so important?
You know, it's funny because if you talk to hockey people, the word grit meant something different than it does in literature now, science literature. You know, there was a very, very popular psychologist, Angela Duckworth, wrote a book called Grit. And it was basically the idea that grit is this idea of passion, purpose, and perseverance, right? It's about being excited about something, about knowing what you want and be able to stay with it, right? So the measurement of grit would be high if you were passionate about something, if you knew what it was, and if you would stay with it, right? So, and she had a grit scale where you could answer questions, and then you would get a number between 1 and 5, 5 being the highest, you know, that means you're the highest level of grit, 1 being the lowest. What's funny though is in hockey, grit doesn't mean that, right? In hockey means is that you're a grinder, that you get in there and you battle and you're chippy and you play hard and all that kind of stuff. So it was funny when I wrote it. I think some people thought I was using the idea of being gritty, right? Being sandpaper, being that agitator kind of player. And I was following Angela Duckworth's sort of definition. And so for me, I expanded it because, again, I wanted to use it for my athletes. I wanted to take the idea and not just understand it from the scientific perspective, but to understand how can I use it now, right? And so I sort of expanded it to, in her definition, it was the passion, purpose, and perseverance. But mine started with passion. It's the idea was to do anything well, you have to be excited about it coming out of the gate, so that you'll learn more, you'll do more, you'll pursue it, right? So I always called it the first P was the passion to start. But then I added perception, which could also be called awareness, but awareness doesn't start with a P, so I had to change it to something else, and I wanted my P's. But anyways, perception is that idea of awareness, and awareness I define as awareness about who I am internally, right? Why I think what I think and why I do what I do, and do I understand myself? And in external awareness is in, you know, what is both situational awareness, what is my current situation, but what is my reality too, right? And so I wanted to expand it outside of that. And then of course I do have purpose. I think the purpose is a foundation to being able to build on anything, to pursue anything. I added practice because for me, the idea of practice is how you master your craft, right? You've got to do it over and over and over and over and over again. You got to get the feedback, right? It's following that idea of deliberate practice. So I threw that in there. And then, of course, perseverance, being able to stay with it the long term, not giving up after the first difficult, struggle that you face along the way. And then I got a passion to stay, right? Because passion to start gets me going. But at some point along the way, I have to have reasons why I'm going to endure this hell that I might be experiencing. Because let's face it, hockey, elite hockey, is a long, hard journey, right? And so you got to have your reasons to stay with it, to stay in there. And I think it comes back to passion. And plus, every pro I've ever talked to about mental game training or anything like that, they always talk about how important it is to love the game, love what you're doing, appreciate what you're having this opportunity to do. And so I think passion to start is different than passion to stay, but it's still passion. And I just think that is so important to anybody. And at the end of the day, that's grit to me, is those concepts.
So basically, you took that concept from Angela Duckworth and put it into ice hockey in your book, basically, and you added 1P more, perception.
Yeah. Well, I added a couple. I added the perception around the awareness piece, right? Because for me, if I'm going to pursue something, I want to make sure that I got sort of a clear field, clear vision of what's going on, both out there and in here. And then I added practice, because I think practice, being able to execute on the stuff that you're learning, that's how you master. And when you master your craft, everything seems to take off from there. So yeah, I did add a couple, but I didn't veer too far from her original premise for sure.
And Angela Duckworth says in her book, I mean, she made the whole study with West Point, with the military cadets, the future officers. And she came to the conclusion that with grit, you can predict the success in the future. Like that's the most important thing, to predict success in the future. Do you, in your experience, when you saw a lot of hockey players and athletes, you agree with that? You can predict success according to the grit level of an athlete?
Well, I think there's probably more than just that number. Of course, there's so many other factors, but quite honestly, I do think there is a mindset that is sort of understood when you look at a gritty person, somebody who has grit. There's a certain mindset, and there are certain rules about, when I face adversity, how do I proceed, right? A gritty person is, well, crap, I wish that didn't happen, but I'm not quitting, I'm not stopping, I'm not going away, I'm moving forward. How can I do that? And that is something that some people have, keep going, others have, too hard, I'm done, right? And so I think for me, grit is a piece of the puzzle. I think it's more along the mindset side of things. But for me, the foundation of every person I ever work with, especially athletes, the foundation is purpose, my why. Why am I doing this? Why am I pursuing this? Awareness. My second block is awareness. Do I know about, how I develop, what I care about, what I'm willing to put myself through? Am I clear on my circumstances and all that? So that awareness block. And then the third block is mindset. And that's where I put my grit, is drop it into that mindset box, because mindset is our beliefs, it's our rules, right? It's our expectations. It's all of that. And that's where grit lives. And so for me, yes, it's definitely a part of the foundation of an elite athlete, or, excellence in anything.
So I experienced a lot of people who believe that that it is talent at the end that determines success. Like when you see young players like 11 or 12 years old, you see people like, oh my God, this kid has talent. He's going to be a huge success in the future. He's going to join the NHL or whatever. How do you see it? Is how important is talent, or are you more of the opinion talent is overrated? Like, to quote the title of the bestseller by Geoff Galter.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that book. One of my top books. If you look at my list of top 10 books, that's on there. But for me, I don't want to rely on talent, especially when you're working with young people, right? Talent to me is it's an advantage that some people get. they're just more skilled, or they're quicker at learning, or they appreciate, relentless practice. Those are attributes that I think give that talented player the advantage, right? And so what it means is that we're all getting ready to take off on this journey, take off on this race to being the best. And you, because you're highly talented, you get to start further up, right? I'm going to have to hang back here. You get to start further up because you've got more talent than me, right? And then you can look at things like opportunities and coaching, and so I could throw a lot of things into that, but talent is certainly one of those things. Yeah. But the thing about talent is that slowly but surely that gap closes between the highly talented and the less talented. That gap closes, and so there are disadvantages of being talented early because you don't learn those skills, you don't develop those skills. And now as you reach those higher levels, you're not sure, what is my advantage now? If everybody's as good as me, what do I do next? And they didn't learn how to close that gap. Younger people who maybe don't have that talent, don't have that natural raw talent, they got to work their butts off, right? Yep. They got to work harder, practice harder. They got to be more resilient, and they got to be patient in their growth and everything like that. But slowly but surely they catch up, they catch up, they catch up. And guess what? Now they have arrived at the same level as that talented player. But guess what? They've got a bag full of tools to help them keep moving on. And that talented player is sitting there going, whoa, where did you get all that stuff? How are you able to go past me? I've always been better than you. What's going on here, right? So and quite honestly, and I talk about it in my book a little bit, the science behind talent to me is clear, right? So we're all born with certain physiological attributes. And if I work on something over and over and over and over, I will change physical attributes about myself. I will change neurons. I will change muscle fibers. I will change endurance factors, right? And so that looks like talent. But guess what? Anybody can do that. Anybody can do that, work on something long and develop those physiological attributes. And so that, to me, is where, if talent was the ticket, then whatever you were born with, whatever you came out of the womb and you had as a bucket full of talent, then at some point you're going to fill out, and then you're going to be done. Right. Oh, well, I got as far as I could. I made it to junior hockey and it was fun. I enjoyed it. Right. There's no way I can go to the next level. Right. But that other mindset is like, well, I made it to junior hockey. Why not keep going? Why not keep going? Here, I've got all these tools I know how to use. Right. And so they keep going. So I don't say the skill doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. Right. But I also know that if that's what you rely on, then you have this, what they call a fixed mindset about my total ability and my potential, and you've capped it off, right? And I don't want folks to do that. I want folks to realize that anything is possible. Hard work, attention to detail, feedback, all that kind of stuff. And so, I don't. And coaches will look at me and they'll say, "Kevin, come on. You know talent matters. You know skill matters. You know these guys that skate fast and all that. They have the advantage." And I say, they absolutely do. But there are also guys on that team that don't skate as fast. There are also guys on that don't have as hard a shot and all that. So they made it too. So you can't tell me it's one or the other. It's both, right?
No. That's an interesting point, what you said, that the player, the kid who has talent, and then he's always at the top player of the team, and then the others slowly catch up. And suddenly he's there and it's like, oh, why? I'm always the best. Now, knowing that, what would you tell to parents if you have a parent and they have like a highly talented young athlete, like 9-year-old, he's like the one first, he's the one who makes he scores all the goals and everything.
Yeah.
And I saw that also what you said, exactly this players, they're less hardworking because it just works because they have that talent, whatever.
Yeah.
They work less. They're suddenly they're very disappointed if once they're not on top. So how do you, what can you do as a parent or a coach to, I kind of say, like, bring this highly talented down to earth that he can really, excel and use his talent, but not, and he's using it to his advantage.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's a really simple solution, and that is to shine the light of your feedback on effort and not talent, right? And the way you do that is Johnny had a really good game. He came off the ice. He's walking out, got his bag over his shoulder. He's walking out to mom and dad, and they look at him and they say, "Oh my gosh, you are so good. You are such a great player, right? You got a goal and an assist. You are such a great player." Right. And so what does that kid hear? They hear, "Oh, I'm a great player. I got goals and I'm a great player." Okay. They don't know why, right? They don't know why, but they're a great player. So what happens if they come off and they didn't get a goal? They didn't play a lot because they weren't on their game, and their parents are walking out. What are the parents going to say? Are they going to look at them and say, "Oh my God, you're such a terrible player, right? You were awful today. You were a bad player," right? The problem is, if we get hooked on this idea that it's me that's getting the result, then if I'm not getting the result, then it must be me, right? Now, all you have to do is change what you shine the light on. Shine the light on effort. Shine the light on attention. Shine the light on resilience and hard work, right? So he's coming out to the lobby. He's got his bag, had a great game, and they look at him and said, "Oh my gosh, you worked so hard today. I was amazed at how hard you competed out there. I was so proud of you," right? So now all of a sudden it's on effort, right? Now we're focused on effort. And so now, and this is subtle, right? You're talking to somebody who's 10, 11, 12 years old. This is a subtle sort of distinction, but now they're starting to think, "Oh, I play well when I work hard," right? Instead of walking away saying, "I play well when I'm good." Well, I don't know how to fix good. I guess I'll just be good until I'm not good. But the person that says, "I play well when I work hard," if they don't play well, guess what? I got to work hard. I've got to focus on effort. I got to focus on attention to detail. Now, we breed perfectionism. Sometimes we got to be careful, right? That it's not always about the harder you work, harder. Sometimes you have to literally back off to play better, right? You know that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's where you shine the light. Are you shining it on you, the person, right? You were given gifts and skills and abilities, and that's why you're good. Or do you shine the light on effort and attention to detail and focus and hard work and motivation, right? All of those things. That's what I want to develop in people. I want to separate this idea that you're good because you were born good versus you were good because you've worked really hard to be good. And I think that's where that excellence comes through. So yes, I agree with you 100% on that.
Okay. So as you said, we mentioned now already kind of like personality traits of, successful athletes. You mentored, you coached many athletes in the past, probably 20 years, I guess. And if you compare all the successful athletes, so are they, like we mentioned, hard work, grit, but are there other personality traits you would say like that makes a good athlete? They all have that in common. That separates the great athlete from the average or the not so good athlete.
Yeah, well, that's a good question too, because I'm working on, like I said, a new project on compete level. And so I wanted to break down those attributes that you see in these highly competitive type players, right? These players that hate to lose, these players that will work extra hard to win. And I love that in an athlete, right? That's not skill. That's not a physical, it's a mental choice to be competitive, right? So I think it's a really important distinction. So I started breaking down, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to be competitive? What does that include? And really what I started to look at, I found about 15 that I really loved. I'll give you a few of them here, but one is confidence. I think compete level starts with confidence. If you believe you can do it, you're willing to lean in and try, right? Confidence is really important. Commitment to do it, not just because it's convenient, not just because somebody asked, but because that's who I am. That's how I play. Right. So I'm committed to being that type of player. Courage means to stay with your commitment, to not wander off, to not be so loosey-goosey that when things aren't exactly how you thought, now you're off on something else, or you start to pause or something like that. So I think courage is a really important factor. And you're going to hear a lot of these things that we talked about in grit. Persistence, right? Staying with it, keep going. Resilience, being able to bounce back when things aren't great. Motivation, how do I get myself out of bed and run on a hot summer morning? Focus, right? Where do I put my attention in detail? When do I use a focus versus a wide focus? Discipline, doing the things that I know I should be, right? There's all kinds of patience and adaptability. I could keep going. Those are the core attributes that I think really make up that that elite player, that competitive type player. But there are three, and I've already mentioned them, that I think are absolutely core, and that's purpose, awareness, and mindset. And like I said, when I've got this roadmap that I give to my athletes on how we're going to get you to excellence. This is the path of getting to excellence, but it always starts with that core foundation of purpose, awareness, and mindset.
You mentioned one thing you mentioned right at the beginning is confidence. That's a personality trait, having confidence in yourself. Now, when you're a teenager, or if you're a child, you have to develop confidence first. I mean, you're raw diamond, so-called, and then you have to develop that. And there I have the feeling that's often coaches or also parents, they actually destroy confidence, or they don't do the right thing to build confidence. Like I saw young players, even like 20-year-olds or something, and when the coach yells at them, then they can't take it, and they play after they really don't play well because they lack the confidence. Of course, there's other players they need to be yelled at to be motivated. But what do you think? How can especially parents and coaches of young children and teenagers build confidence in their players or in their kids?
Well, I think confidence is both a reality based. I'm looking back on things that I've been able to do well, things that people tell me I'm really good at, right? So I have confidence around those things. There's evidence, right? There's proof that I'm good at those things. Now, if I start to struggle at that, and now I'm starting to struggle, I'm failing, I'm not reaching my potential, those kinds of things, then my confidence could wither, right? But I can expand back out because I have done those things before. So I just got to work through it. Somebody that's never done something before, they don't have that memory, those history to fall back on. So they're going to have to develop slowly but surely this idea of I can do it, right? Well, how do you do that? Well, you start by trying, right? And you get a result. And that result might be close to what you're trying to get to, or it might not be great at all. But what do? Is you pay attention to, well, that wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Let me try this. And then you do it again, right? And then you get a result. And then you do it again and you get a result. And so you've got to analyze the results you're getting, and you're moving up, you're moving up, you're moving up. The problem is that after one or two times, if a coach looks at you or a parent looks at you and says, what's wrong with you? It doesn't even look like you're trying. Why are you so bad at this? Why aren't you able to do these things that we've been talking about for a month? Well, what's that kid going to think? They're going to think, well, I must be terrible at it, or they think I'm terrible at it. So that confidence has just got squashed. And now that confidence is really hard to bring back. And the reason is because there is no history. When I tried to do it, when I failed, when I tried again, when I failed, when I tried again, I got yelled at. So how am I going to build up this skill? How am I going to get to this point where I'm worthy to have confidence around it? So what I would say to parents is let these people try, let them fail, let them learn from their mistakes, and cheer them on to keep going again. Really, again, it's just, where am I going to shine the light? If you can't do something and I yell at you because you can't do it, then that's not helpful. But if I see you can't do something and I say, you know what, you try this, do this instead of that and see what happens. And they do it and they still fail. And they say, that's okay. It was better than last time, wasn't it? Try again, right? And so now what are we doing? We're creating history, we're creating evidence, and we're building confidence. And I think at the end of the day, to me, confidence is all about, not only do I believe I can do it, but is there something in the world that's happened to me, to others, that gives me a reasonable sort of sense of evidence that it is possible, right? And so confidence, I think, is, because there are some people that are confident they're going to be a great player, but they don't have the evidence yet. Okay, that's fine. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's work really hard and get to that point. But at some point you will have it, and you will have that confidence. And so, yeah, confidence to me is sort of looking back at, what proof do I have that I am worthy of believing this about myself? But I also understand that if I don't believe something about myself, it's probably never going to happen, right? So now we're getting to this idea of what am I expecting from myself, and where do I think I can get to based on what other people have been able to do in my situation, at my skill level, and all that kind of stuff. So they have to feed into that. And then honestly, there's one last piece of confidence that is great, but it's because it's external. It's not going to be there with us when we're in the quietness of our own mind, and that is feedback from somebody else. If you look at somebody and say, oh my gosh, you, for such a young player, you're phenomenal, right? You're a really great player. What do you think that's going to do? It's going to boost their confidence. But where's the evidence? Yeah. Their evidence is what they said. Well, what if they're not there? Does that mean it's not valid anymore? My confidence is going to wither. If nobody said that ever again, does that mean that they were wrong and everybody else is right? So it's a fragile game. But at the end of the day, and I say this in my book, I say this in everything that I coach, confidence is probably the most important factor in anybody being great at anything. And so if you don't have confidence, you're going to struggle. But confidence followed by commitment, followed by courage, followed by all these other attributes that we talked about is what gets people to where they want to go.
No, you said it. Basically, like, you can also look at other examples, people who manage to do something to get confidence that I could do it too. There's like, I see somebody who has success or who overcame adversity against all odds or something, and it can motivate me to say, like, I can do that too if this person can do it. Do you have any example or story or something from your life where you had like an athlete who overcame all odds, kind of like the Rocky story or something?
Well, you know what? I like my example because when I was growing up, I lived in Virginia. There wasn't hockey around me. That wasn't something that I got to do growing up. I played baseball and soccer and football. I didn't play hockey. As much as I fell in love with it, I didn't get to play it as a young person, but I watched the Miracle on Ice. I watched college kids beat a hockey dynasty, right? And something happened to me. I go back to my passion to start, right? This idea that how did that happen? How did these college kids beat a dynasty, in the most important athletic setting, in the world at the time? And I had to know why. So what happened was that curiosity of how did the heck did that happen, right? That fed into the passion. Oh, I've got to learn this. Right. And then that sort of led into sort of a purpose. How can I then take this and do something with it? Right. So I got to get better. I got to get smarter. I got to be able to answer questions about it. And so that became my calling. And then the mastery followed all that. So how do you get to that? Is it always starts with curiosity, right? Something that has got my attention. I'm interested. I might start pursuing it. And then you catch that bug, right? Oh my gosh, this is so cool. I got to learn about it. And then now that I'm doing something with it, now that I've learned it, what can I do with it? What can I do with it? Where can I go with this? Right. So it's that progression I think is so powerful. And there's a really good book by Stephen Kotler called The Art of Impossible. And he talks about this idea of how motivation is the curiosity that feeds into passion, that feeds into purpose, that feeds into mastery. And to me, when I look at that, because his book is mainly about flow, how do I get to flow, right? And everybody wants to get to flow, and flow is that magical state where I'm a genius, everything I do is perfect and I can't do anything wrong. Oh, and by the way, it's fun. And oh, by the way, it's easy, right? So flow is a great place to be. And the idea how it starts to me, though, is with curiosity was mind-blowing, because when I look at everything I've ever done, when I look at anything my kids have ever done, when I look at anything that's ever happened that people have gone somewhere, it's not because they just were skilled or because they were meant to do that or because they had a great coach. It's because it started out with this spark of curiosity, right? And when you can feed that into passion, feed that into a direction and purpose of why, you got the makings of a very, very successful individual. Yeah.
Funny that you mentioned the Miracle on Ice, because I remember I was 10 years old in 1980 when I saw the game. And I mean, this was the Cold War, living in Europe, it was like something that was constantly there. There's like the Warsaw Pact versus NATO, communism against capitalism. For us, I mean, as a 10-year-old, I saw Brezhnev, the president, who was with his big eyebrows. He was like the mean person. So it was really like, the mean East, the good West. And then this Miracle on Ice came in this year where there were like gas shortages. And it was like a negative. It was very negative. And then this this game came with his college kids around Hal Brooks, just made the impossible, and it was the good versus the evil. And I saw I remember the coach there also standing, making his mean face, the Soviet coach. And it was so much more than a game. It was so inspiring, like for the whole world. I think it's like, it gave a motivation and inspiration for everything. And the West came back in some way. It was like, it was so much more than a game, and it inspired me too.
Yes.
It was also something as a 10-year-old, and it was also one of the reasons why I started studying psychology, and especially into motivation and how to. And it is. It's like you need these moments in your life, you know.
Yeah, it's a shift, it's just a monumental shift, and it now you're on a new path. You're on a new path, and it becomes the reason that you get up and do things. So that was mine, anyways.
Yeah. So with your insights, you have a lot of insights, and what does that mean? Like, what do you tell scouts or coaches or GMs when they recruit new players? I have the feeling that many scouts and professional scouts, they do normally a very good job, but you have, I think sometimes all they do is look at the statistics. I know in North America, especially, the statistics are everything. Everything is measured, and sometimes I think some coaches, GMs, and scouts, they select a team going through elite prospect, looking at the goals and how many assists they made, and that's how they choose. Now, if I understand you right, there's much more, as we said, than just goals and assists. What would you tell a coach, a GM, or a scout who recruits people on what does he have to look for in a player?
So I even go back to my foundation when I'm looking at like a question like this, when I'm thinking about how can I tell where this player's at, where they're going to go, what their potential could be. If I'm talking to a coach or a scout or something, it comes down to awareness. When I'm observing them play, am I open to all possibilities, right? Or am I closing down and just seeing what I'm seeing? And then it comes down to, what have I decided about that? What have I decided about the way this guy played in the third period? What have I decided? I've seen him twice or three times. Oh, that's the kind of player he is, right? So we talk about mindset. Well, mindset is sort of rules, right? It's the way we're going to see something based on how we frame it. That is how I'm looking at this, right? So they see a kid, they get an idea about a kid, that becomes, and so stats are important because stats don't care what your opinion is, right? They're just facts. But other than that, scouting really does come down to a sense, right? A feeling about somebody, the way they played. I like the way they did that. I like the way they battle. I like that. And how do you quantify that? It's hard. It's almost impossible. It's why we're just okay when we scout, young people. There's a lot of people that don't go anywhere. There's times people get picked last in the draft and they end up being the best player, in the league. So at the end of the day, what I would say is you got to open up your awareness, try to see reality, right, as best you can. Notice when you have biases, when you are shutting down and leaning into your beliefs instead of seeing what's really there. And then recognize too that these are young people. They are works in progress, not only physically and skill wise, but mentally, right? Their brains, I'm sure you've heard that the brain doesn't mature until, it's middle 20s. Some say 25, some say 26, some say 23, but we know it's in their 20s, right? And a lot of people we're working with, at least in that junior path, can be 14 or 15 or 16 or 20, right? I don't care, but they're still not 26 and their brain is still not all the way developed. So we have to appreciate that. How is that going to develop? Well, again, it goes back to attributes. It goes back to habits, right? So when I look at a player, I'm saying, okay, you were born with certain traits, certain preferences for being outgoing versus a little quiet, being, sort of adventurous and spontaneous versus sort of a little reserved. And I like things, organized. And so those are a lot of inborn traits. You didn't really, some of those stuff you learn, some of that stuff is reinforced, but you sort of get born with that stuff. Those are traits. That's what I call DNA, right? And then there are habits that we form along the way based on feedback, based on results and all that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that I'm separating traits from habits, because habits I have a lot of control over. Traits I don't so much, but there are ways that you can highlight traits that seem to, do well in certain situations, and you share that with folks of how this trait gives you the advantage in this situation, or how this trait might hold you back. So here's what I would do, right? So I'm using both. But at the end of the day, to sort of answer that question, is what I would want to be able to do is I want to be able to recognize that these are works in progress, catch myself when I'm having some sort of cognitive bias, right? I've applied my rule on something, and so now all of a sudden it may or may not be right. I think it's right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have applied the rule. Everything that I've ever lived in my life tells me I am right, but I might not be, right? I might not be. I remember reading a research paper, and somebody was talking about how the red you see and the red I see, we don't actually know if it's the same red, right? We just assume it is. You call it red, I call it red, but we don't really know what's happening here to why we called it red, right? Yeah. And so I say the same thing with athletes, is that you called them great, I called them so-so, but I don't know why you did and why I did. Yeah. But guess what? Let's go to the stats. The stats don't lie, right? So let's add more, because more stats is always better, right? And I think that's why we do it, sort of cover our butts. But let's face it, some guys have instinct. Some guys can watch somebody play and just say, yeah, either I get an energy from that person and I get it. I know the kind of coach I am, that I would be really good for them. Those are other kinds of decisions that you make. They may not be great, but oh my gosh, what they need, I'm really good at. So that might be why so again, and that's the funny part, is none of that necessarily has to do with raw skill, right? It has to sort of do with impressions, instinct, cognitive biases, stuff like that. So yeah, it's a tough game.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it, cognitive bias. You mentioned awareness just before. In your book, you also talk a lot about self-awareness, self-judgment. And we all suffer of this phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. Like this is why we justify our weaknesses always by circumstances or other people's fault. Like we are always good, basically. But yes. But how can we develop like a self-awareness that is that is true to the reality? Not that we lie to ourselves. As I said, we often lie to ourselves. So how can we develop that?
That's one of the things I'm trying to highlight when I work with athletes, is working on that first layer. Why are you doing what you do? That purpose, that clarity. Why do you do? What's your true north, right? And then, so tell me about yourself. What do you know about yourself, right? So I want to get in. I want to understand, how do you process yourself? How do you process what you're thinking? Well, I don't really. I just do things. Okay, so let's talk about that, because that's an opportunity for you to get really, really good at something. Because if you think about awareness and all that, it's the idea that I had a thought. That thought made me feel something. How I felt changed how I behaved, which is now changing the way I think. So you get this cycle, this triad, right, of thought, feeling, action, thought, feeling, action, right? And we're going around this really thing. So if that's sort of how I am, if you're really, really good at being able to recognize any of those at any given time, guess what? You've just opened up awareness for yourselves in a huge, huge way, right? I teach this concept called be your best coach, right? How to be your best coach. And that's the idea that, when we do something, we make a mistake or whatever, we're quick to jump on ourselves. What's wrong with you? You're so dumb. You're so terrible. Why do you keep doing that? Right. And we just really hammer ourselves. That inner critic comes out with knives. And so the idea behind be your best coach is, if that happened to your teammate, to the best teammate, your best friend on the team, and they did that, would you go over to them and say to them all the things you just said to yourself? No way. You'd never do that. Unless you're just a big jerk, you would never do that. You would say, that's okay. That's not you. Don't hang on to that. Just let it go. Move on. Right. So, and that's what you would do. So I need the people that I'm working with to understand that you have to be your best coach. Right. So what we do is we go in and explore how to do that. Well, the way you do that is you got to get really good at being able to see the world for the way it really is. So what is that? That's external awareness. And you got to get really good at being able to understand the thoughts that are coming in and how is that making you feel, right? So if I'm sitting with them and they tell me about something and I said, the classic psychologist question is, well, how did that make you feel, right? Well, I want them to process that. How did it make you feel? Yeah. Because what did you do right after that? Oh, isn't that interesting? You thought this, you felt this, and you did that. And it didn't work so well, right? So, hey, we just had an awareness right here. We just learned something about ourselves. But we got to keep doing it over and over and over again. And quite honestly, it starts with mindful training, right? I do a lot of mindfulness training and stuff, but I have found that sometimes, at least with athletes, the mindfulness is a turnoff. Meditation is a turnoff. They know that that's becoming more a part of it, but those words are not necessarily words that they gravitate to. I don't know how many times if I said mindfulness before I do a workshop or something, you see guys going, "Oh, okay, right, we're going to do that again." All right. So, but I call it awareness training, awareness and attention training, because I sort of camouflage it again, just like with some of my theories in my book. I like to camouflage things so you're learning life skills, but you think you're learning something for your sport. So that idea of awareness training is that's what we do when we go there, when we're breathing and we're paying attention to our breath and we see it, and then our mind wanders off and starts thinking about something else, right? I want you to notice that. Oh, did you notice that your mind wandered because you lost count of your breaths? Bring it back. Just bring that thought back and go back to breathing. And they do it and they do it. And, oh, your mind wandered again. Isn't that interesting? Guess what? That's what our minds do. They wander. They wander off. They're like a little puppy. You set them down, they're going to wander off and do something that shouldn't, right? Notice that. If you can notice that, then when something, and you practice and you train, right? It's nothing's ever perfect the first time. Then as you're going up, as you're experiencing life, as you're sitting on the bench and you get, short shifted and then miss the next shift and your brain is starting to go off, like going off all these crazy things like, oh my God, the coach hates me. He's never going to play me again. This is probably my last shift. He's probably going to trade me from the team. All this crazy stuff. Notice it. Notice it. Did you notice it? Guess what? That's awareness training, right? Now that you've noticed it, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? And again, that's more the stuff that we train, because at the end of the day, I don't want my folks to think that, and I don't want to go too deep, but the idea that I'm really frustrated, right? I'm super frustrated. That can really lock somebody into being a certain way. I'm frustrated, so I'm going to storm around. I'm going to be all grumpy and all that kind of stuff because I'm frustrated, right? What if you change that and you just said, I notice that I'm starting to feel frustrated, right? I notice that I'm feeling really frustrated. Now, all of a sudden, you're not frustration. You're you that is experiencing frustration. It's right here, and it's sort of like somebody threw a blanket over me called frustration, and now I'm frustration. Well, no, take the blanket off. Take it off. No. Frustration is there. You're here. That's awareness, right? So these are the things that we're working on, so that when you're at your worst and the circumstances are super important, and for whatever reason you're not delivering it, you have two choices: to step up or step back, right? Well, if this is a game and we've got to win, you got to step up. Well, you got to notice it. You got to notice how I'm reacting, how I'm feeling, what's that's causing me to do. And that's the whole awareness stuff. So I know I'm going on and on. I'm sure this is a lot more than what you expect, but it's the core, the purpose, the awareness, and the mindset. That awareness piece is so important, because if we just teach them how to skate and pass and shoot and bounce back after adversity and all that well, how do I do that? Well, you just do it. Yeah. Well, how? Well, you do it. You just toughen up and you do it, right? And that's what we do as coaches. We just say, do it. I love my story about a guy goes into the corner and battles hard but loses, right? So the coach pulls him aside and says, listen, okay, here's what you need to do. When you enter that battle, you need to have your stick in this position. You need to lean. You got to angle in. You've got to pin, blah, blah, blah. So it gives them all these skills, all these physical skills to make it better at battling, right? But what if they don't believe that they're going to win? What if they don't think that they can ever win these battles? Guess what? They're still going to lose. All that stuff you just told them, they're still going to lose. So at its core is things like confidence, things like commitments, things like discipline, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Now, it's funny that you mentioned that the mindful training and meditation and all that stuff, that often athletes, especially in ice hockey or other such a little bit rough sports, or have this they don't like it too much and you have to camouflage it. I had once was working with a team who had a losing streak, and then I brought in a mental coach. And he, it was funny, was the team. I remember the captain came to me and he's like, "Oh, what we're gonna do is, do we let ourselves fall in the arms of other guys with blindfolded, or they were going to hug
Yeah.
trees. And so, they were just totally negative. And the guy, that mental coach, what he does, he teaches mindfulness with boxing. So it was like they first had to box each other, and he was observing and he was telling them stuff. And it was such a huge success because it was something he camouflaged it basically with something manly, with something, and then suddenly it worked excellent. And they went from a losing streak to a winning streak for 13 games. So it was like really a great story. And what you said, this frustration, you mentioned frustration, and frustration has something to do, I think, with expectations, and expectations have to do with goal setting. Like we set ourselves a goal, we don't reach the goal, and then we're frustrated because we expected something else. Like our personal expectation management was screwed. So how important is goal setting and expectation management? Because I think it goes together. But how important is it, and how do you do it right?
Yeah. Well, the goal setting piece is one of those things that if you start talking about goal setting, people roll their eyes going, oh, I know I need to do it. And my goal is going to be 5 years, 10 years, blah, blah. And so they don't really take it seriously. And so what I try to do with my goal setting is keep it sort of a short term. What do you want to do this season? Well, what do you like to accomplish, for this next game? Those kinds of things to keep it real. But you hit on something that I think might be one of the most important mental considerations in anything, but certainly in high level sports, and that's expectation, right? Because at the end of the day, you're right, you're frustrated. Why? Because I thought I was going to be able to do this, or this was going to happen, and it didn't. And that's super, super frustrating. But here's the thing about expectations is that they do draw us in the direction that we want to go, right? What we think about is where we are moving, right? And so if we put an expectation on the other side of this idea, then it gives me that pull towards what I want to accomplish. But expectations also frame something so that now you stop seeing anything else, right? Which is good if I need focus and attention, is bad if I need awareness, right? And so what happens with expectations is a lot of times, again, we're sometimes our own worst enemies. And so if we don't meet in expectations, we beat ourselves up. And so now the expectation sort of becomes the beginning of a whipping, right? I hate that. But if we crush it, say we expect to win the league, right? We expect to be the best team throughout the year, win the championships, and be the ones holding that trophy at the end of it. And you hit it, well, then it's all validating. It's all, oh, see, I knew I was supposed to be. That's exactly how it works. But we know that's seldom happens. If you look at the NHL, if one team wins, everybody else lost. So not everybody is going to have that end game. But the thing about expectations is it does draw you towards that. It paints a picture of what you think it should be, and actually, I like to use it for development because I push people, right? I push people with expectations. I want you to think that you're going to be able to achieve that, and you're going to have to work hard. You have to do certain things, and then you will. You're not there yet, and then you will. But then once you do, I need you to raise the bar. Again, it goes to the goal setting that you talked about. I like to have, really big, hard goals, they call them. Yeah. And I like to have the tasks that we're doing along the way, but I need to manage those expectations. If I see somebody who's constantly frustrated, who's constantly, that they're out of control, or even they could be quiet, but secretly struggling because of perfectionism. Perfectionism to me is what? It's an expectation, right? And perfectionism can be both positive and negative. Positive in that it draws you towards excellence, mastery. Negative as in it creates concern and frustration and worry, right? So we got to manage that. But what is that? That's expectations. And it always comes down to that block of mindset. In my opinion, mindset is that third core block. And so if you can't manage those expectations, then you're going to be reeling. You're at the mercy of them. But if you can manage them, if you can notice them, right? This one was set way too high. Oh, guess what? That wasn't even mine. That came from my dad. My dad thinks I should be the best player on the team, right? You hear those, right? You see them all the time.
Absolutely.
My dad thinks I should be the best. So I'm going to adopt that. I think I should be the best player on the team because my dad thinks I should be the best player on the team. But guess what? I'm not the best player on my team. So I'm beating myself, beating up and now I'm starting to feel bad about myself. Oh my God, he's going to be ashamed of me. He's going to be embarrassed of me. I am ashamed of myself. I'm embarrassed. So that ends up being a giant negative. At the end of the year. It was a loss for the year because I wasn't the best player on the team. My dad thought I should be. Maybe I shouldn't even be playing, right? And so that's a perfect example of how it can turn into something diabolical and really take people out of the game.
It's a good example you brought. Like I knew an athlete who, in an individual sports, who went to the Olympics, and it was a she, and she put so much pressure on herself because she thought her parents expected her to win the gold medal or at least make a medal at the Winter Olympics. So when she didn't do it, she was very, very strong. She was like in the top 10. She actually committed a suicide attempt when she came back. And it was all because she thought she disappointed her parents, and that her parents were not at all like she believed that her parents had such high expectations. And then she beat herself up to an extreme after.
Yeah, no, you hit on something that I think is we're seeing more and more and more of it. There was a recent story here in the States of a rising softball pitcher who was just an amazing talent, was getting drafted, wasn't even on the team yet, was just getting on the team, a freshman playing college. And she, before she even started down that path, she just decided it was going to be too hard. She couldn't do it. And so she made the decision to leave this world. And it's crushing. It's crushing to see when you carry that weight. And so again, it's management, right? I talk about smart expectations. I call them great expectations because in my mind, the perfect expectation is the one that pulls you towards something great. It pushes you hard to stay with it, to do what it takes to do it. But stretches you, but doesn't break you, right? That's the theme. I want to stretch you. I want to push you as hard as I can, but I don't want you to snap, right? And so I talk about expectations that are both internal and external, how they can really mess you up. So you're hitting on these really subtle things. When I talk to people and I say, hey, we could work together and do this, they immediately think of all sort of the periphery type, the surface level mental game training skills like visualization and these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, being able to get a little bit deeper into what are your rules? What are your rules for life? What are your rules for hockey? What is your mindset on growth versus fixed mindset kind of things? What are your expectations for where you think you can, and are those yours or did they come from others, right? And then how does that feel? Do you feel good about that, right? Because a good way to kill passion, to kill motivation is to have it start coming from other people, right? In the form of rewards and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden that internal burning desire, which we all know is the most powerful, it sort of goes out because so many other people wanted it so much for you that it just sort of puts yours out. And now that passion to stay I mentioned, it sort of dissolves. But my biggest frustration is when I see massively skilled individuals getting out of the game or anything because of the mental side, not because of the physical side. Oh no, I love the sport. Oh no, I loved my teammates. Oh, I loved playing. I loved the exercise. I loved the community, right? But it was just too much pressure from my coach or too much pressure from my parent. I just couldn't handle it. It was always stressful. So I quit. And that's just so disappointing to me.
You're absolutely right there. You talk in your book also about the importance of gratitude, and I think gratitude is something also, as everything we talked just right now, it's not only for sports; it's in all aspects of life. And I think we humans should do more gratitude. We should be more aware of the good stuff. You emphasize the importance of gratitude, but what exactly would you say are the benefits of gratitude for athletes?
Well, without getting too sciencey, the thing I think is most amazing about being grateful are the changes that happen in your brain. And I'm not kidding when I say they've done a lot of research to understand why being thankful for the things that you've been given in life, why does that actually change your brain and make you less anxious, less depressed, more appreciative and all that. And it's because of, like I said, physiological changes in the brain, the way that it increases certain size areas of the brain, decreases other certain areas of the brain. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, why gratitude is because gratitude, if you've ever had something taken away, then you understand what feeling grateful that you had it to begin with, right? Well, young people, they don't have so many of those things that have happened. As we get older, of course, there's a lot of things that we're appreciative now that when we had it, we didn't even understand how grateful we should be. Now that we don't have it, our kids are grown up, they're moved down, that kind of appreciation, you know what I'm saying? And now you're looking at going, oh my gosh, that was such an amazing time. I wish I would have just appreciated it more, right? So here's what, and this is when I go back to my awareness training, and this is why the gratitude is sort of loaded into that. I want people to recognize this gift that you've been given to be able to play this sport, right? So, and I just ask them, I say, do you realize how awesome it is that you are in this situation where you could play? You could play this sport on this team with this coach and these teammates. Have you ever really thought about it? And good thing, more and more kids are noticing it, which is really heartwarming. But those that don't say, you know, I'm not really, but you're right. You're right. This is incredible. And I say, well, then go home and give your mom and dad a hug and say, thank you for this, because this is incredible. But that's not enough, right? So how do we do it on a regular basis so we can make those changes in our brains? Well, it comes down to that mindfulness training. Don't say anybody I said that, but it's an awareness and an attention towards making a deliberate effort to just be grateful. And so, and I've seen it taught different ways. At the end of the day, before you go to sleep, if you can remember, and this is the hardest part about any of these skills is to remember to do it, but right before you put your head down, I want you just to be thankful for one or two things that happened today that were pretty awesome, right? And it might have been something that happened that wasn't great, but you handled it great. And you're really proud of how you've gotten good at being able to handle that stuff. And oh, by the way, when you start noticing that, that's another level of awareness, is that you were aware that you were aware. Oh man, are we getting deep now? And I love that, man. When that happens like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're on the path with this one, right? But it's just, can you remember before you go to sleep, just think of one or two things that was pretty awesome today. And you know what? If you can't think of anything, then guess what? When you woke up and you put your feet on the ground and you stood up and got, guess what? There's a lot of people that can't do that. There's a lot of people that died yesterday that aren't alive today. And so I can pull things out and they're like, yeah, but that's not. And I said, well, no, it is. Do you understand when you injure a part, right? I remember I blew my knee out and you don't appreciate how easy it is to go up and down the stairs and do things until you blow your knee out and you're in a cast from your hip down, right? Nothing is easy anymore, right? I remember when I was young and started having babies, and I had to run the store, stuff like that. Well, when I didn't have kids, run down there, get what you need and come back. When you have kids, it's like, oh my God, what a chore. I got to pack them up. I got to make sure I got all this stuff. I got to put them in this chair. I got to bolt this chair into I got to drive, and then I got to get out of the car. And all I needed was, lunch meat for sandwiches tomorrow, right? Something like that. Anyways, if I can, that's where I start with gratitude is, listen, all I need to do is appreciate something good that happened today. And if you'll do that, it will make changes in your brain so that you are less anxious and less depressed. Do you want to be less anxious and less depressed? Yes, I do. Okay, then just do that and just trust me that it's happening, right? So I got to go there a lot. Just trust me, it's happening. All of this mindful stuff is an exercise with a delayed sort of effect, right? And it's hard to keep people with it because there is a delayed effect. It's like I said that, can you imagine being in a shower and the water's a little bit too cold, so you turn it and then it doesn't change. So you turn it a little bit more and it doesn't change. You turn, and all of a sudden it's scalding, right? And you're like, oh my God, it's burning me out. So you turn it down and it's still burning and you turn it down. Imagine that delayed reaction on a knob, hot and cold, but now extended in this idea of mindfulness, right? Awareness training, that if you'll do these things, you'll have better decision-making skills. You'll have better control over your, composure and resilience. You'll be able to handle adversity better. If you do these things, will you trust me? And you got to get them to, but when they notice, you know what? I'm just really proud of myself on how I handled that. That's incredible. That's an incredible observation for somebody. And I would tell them, that's how you know it's working, right? Ask somebody else that's been doing this for just a few weeks, such and such happened and I didn't blow up. I wasn't so upset. Usually I get really, really upset. I get really mad. I just go off. and I didn't this time. And I said, that's how you can tell it's happening, right? Because what we do is we're increasing the gap between something happening and my response. Without any kind of mindfulness, it's like that. There is no gap, right? Something happens, I instantly respond. But as we get better at awareness, we increase that gap, right? And so now we have this process of being able to analyze the response, and then we're able to get further on with that. So
I love the idea of the, as you said, like every night before going to bed, thinking about some positive things. When my children or our children were younger, we did this like every night we wrote down the 3 positive things of the day, and
awesome.
and they liked it. Like, it's, you know, it was like suddenly after a while, it was like, hey, we didn't do it today, and it's like, it was kind of like get together, talking about before they go to bed, what was good today, and just the good, not the negative. I didn't say like, I didn't want to hear about negative stuff. We said we just write down the positive things, and I think that something is this gratitude journaling. You could do that also with a team, or with even at work with your coworkers. You know, as a boss, you can take your coworkers once a week or something and say, hey, what was positive this week, and write that down and confirm that. And I believe really a lot in that, and be focused not enough, I think, on these positive things that happened to us during the day, and all the privileges we have. And we just not aware. And I said that you mentioned that the journey that a young athlete can take, you know, like if you see it with our son, like we just talked about that today, my wife and I said, you know, it's amazing. Like if you're like 18 years old, you can play at World Juniors, you can play abroad. You have 5,000-6,000 people in an arena. You get to know other people, other cultures. It's amazing. It's amazing, all that, and you have to be thankful for that. And I think it's difficult for young at a certain age because it's so normal. You don't have this experience. We are looking back, saying, oh my God, you know, half of our life is gone. And but I think it's up to us as parents and coaches, and so to create this, that kids and the players, the athletes also become aware of all the privileges and all the good things that happens around them. And talking about that, like creating good circumstances. When I often have the feeling, when I look at parents, very engaged. I mean, it is a huge commitment. If your kids do competitive sports, it doesn't matter which sports, or even if they play an instrument or something, when they really go on a competitive level, it's also a huge commitment for the parents. You get up at 5 a.m, you bring them, whatever. And it's also very emotional. But often I have the feeling it's the parents themselves. They mean to do well, but they're the biggest obstacle on the road to success for their children. Because, as I said, they mean to do well, but often I have the feeling it's actually really not good what they do. I give an example. Paying money for making goals or whatever. But I think sometimes, oh my God, this is not going to work. And what is, in your experience, what are the biggest mistakes that parents do on the journey of their young athletes, of their children? What are the biggest mistakes?
Well, you hit on something right there, and that is when the pursuit of this, goal is more important to the parent than it is the child, or it started out more important to the child, but as the parent gets more and more hyped up, what happens, as I mentioned this before, is that as theirs grows, theirs shrinks, right? And and people don't understand that when I get so into their participation in something, that it actually pushes them out of it. If they understood that, they'd stop doing that, right? Because that's exact opposite of what you want to happen. But if you visualize that, the more I lean in to help them, the more they're leaning out to get away from me. So I got to appreciate that. So that's when I'm working with parents, that's one of the first things that I tell them is you cannot become the source of motivation and inspiration for your child playing a sport, right? Because you'll steal that passion, and then they're not interested. You can't figure out why. You did everything that you could for them. You gave them every advantage in the world for them. You gave them, road rides and equipment and all that kind of stuff. And I said, yes, but that's part of the why they're out of it, and it's a hard thing for people to understand. But I say, promise me you'll picture that the harder you push, the more they're stepping away. So just moderate, control that. The other thing is that let's face it, when it comes to our kids, we get on these, like I call them parent goggles, right? And the way we see the kid is not the way the rest of the world sees the kid. I don't care who you are. That even as hard as you try, right, to just see my kid as he is and not is, you can't. They're your kid. You cannot take your goggles off, but you can recognize that there probably is some distortions. So when somebody says, you know, something that you don't agree with, or you maybe don't even like that they said about your kid, just hold it in, relax, quiet down, just because it's their observation, might be right, might be wrong. Me fighting them just shows that I'm a crazy person, right? So I don't want to do that. So I share the idea of parent goggles and say, you know, let your kids experience all of this, right? When they're high and flying, don't be so amazingly gushing that they think that this is the way it needs to be all the time. Otherwise, this is why it's not worth it, right? Because that happens too, right? We had a great season. My parents were all in, and it was an awesome thing. Next season, we didn't win anything, and my parents didn't want to do anything, right? So all of a sudden, I'm putting these 2 and 2s together. If we're winning and I'm playing well, then my parents love me. If I'm not, then they don't, right? That's definitely not a message that we want to send. Trying to live through your kids, right? Trying to, you know, replay all the things that you did and the way that you played and what it meant to you when you were doing it, right? And trying to instill that on your kids. That's another thing that's really going to blow up in your face, because they're individuals. They may or may not be as excited about some of the things that you think are the most important things. And then parents will look at me and say, but they don't know. They don't know. I need to make sure that they know. And I say, well, they'll learn. But if you force it down their throat too soon, they're going to say, oh, well, never mind then, right? Because they weren't ready for it. And then, of course, it's that parent who just wants their kids to be perfect, the best of everything. So they push until they finally blow up and explode. And now all of a sudden that relationship is damaged for a long, long time. And that's hard. But you mentioned something, how the parents can get very emotionally involved. And this is one of the things that is heartbreaking when I see it. And that is when a kid has really done well. They're moving up and they're all the way at that junior level. They're ready to make that next step, major, junior. Maybe they're on a high-end college team or something like that. And then they realize that this just isn't what I want to do anymore. There are other things. I've been doing this a long time. I want to hang with my friends. I don't want to play college or hockey in college. I'd rather just be a regular person. And then the parents are like just taken aback. Their whole world has just exploded because that's what they were trying to get to, and now it's being taken away. And I've really had to work with some, mainly dads. I don't want to be sexist, but some dads who just could not comprehend how we got all the way here to the finish line and he's done. He doesn't want to play anymore. And they just could not understand how that could ever happen. And that's when you know you're just way too involved. If you didn't even know that this was potentially coming is one thing, but then when they make that hard decision and then that's your response, then that's a tough thing too. And again, I don't want sport to ever become sort of a disconnect between, you know, I want to look back and say, my God, those were incredible times. Yeah, they were hard. Those long trips and being stuck in the snow and having to stay in that crappy hotel and all that stuff that goes with this journey, you know, as a family. I want them to go think back and say, yeah, they were hard, but man, were they fun? They were amazing. That's what I try to remind. And that's part of the gratitude too, is I always say, you're going to look back and you're going to remember how incredible this was, because it goes by really fast, right? So this idea of gratitude isn't just for the athletes, right? So the parents too, it's for the coaches. You know, think about a coach that's going through team after team after team, trying to get to that championship. And it's just a grind and they're worn out. Well, did you ever appreciate anything along the way? Did you appreciate some of the athletes you got to work with? Did you appreciate how you were able to move up and some years have great results? No, I'm just trying to win. I'm just trying to get better and win, right? So it's that gratitude piece that you got to remind not just kids, but, you know, parents and coaches too.
No, I think that's a great point you have there. Like it is like, you know, the whole journey, if you look back and you mentioned gratitude as a parent, you have to be grateful for the moments you were able to live with your children in the young age on their journey as an athlete, and just the long road trips this, I mean, this time when you're like driving 3-4 hours, 2 hours in the car alone with your son or your daughter or something,
Yeah.
and their emotions, maybe they lost, maybe they won, and you have these intensive talks after where it doesn't matter if they win or lose, it is going to be intense, and this moment you don't get back, and it's so intimate, intimate and personal, and I think this you have to appreciate as a parent, and I think it's part of a great journey of a great life if you can see the good stuff. And it's gratitude again, as you said.
Yeah.
You mentioned the parent goggle, and it's true what you say. It's impossible as a parent. Even I'm so aware of all this bias and everything, and I'm really always try to be like as realistic as possible. And there's you can't be. You can't be. So what I do, and I don't know what you recommend to parents, because what I do, I have some confidence, like his agent or old coaches or something of my son.
Mm-hmm.
Or so I ask them if I'm not sure if I see it right or so. So to have like somebody else giving me an opinion. And I think, what do you think?
Oh, well, it's funny because think about hearing somebody gush over your player, right? There's nothing that feels better. They could tell you that you won $1 million, that you're the most important person in the world, and it wouldn't feel as good as them looking at you saying, my gosh, you have raised an incredible kid. He is a hell of a hockey player. I'm so glad he's on our team, right? That will just fill you up like you've never, but have somebody, come around and say, wow, what's wrong with your son? Is he not feeling good? And you're thinking to yourself, what are you talking about? What do you mean he's not feeling good? Did he play? And that's as crushing as being run over by a semi, right? And so at the end of the day, that's part of the goggles, is that we're so emotionally invested in everything, right? But part of it, I think, is that we have to allow our kids to struggle with adversity, right? That's the only way you become, you reach your full potential, is that you got to work through the adversity. If I keep plowing the road so that you never have to struggle with anything as we go, I'm not doing you any favors, because guess what? Life will find you. It always has a way to sneak up and find you. And if you haven't learned how to handle adversity along the way, then when it happens, you're not going to have the tools. And you're going to be in a really, really bad spot. And it could be, we talked about that young Olympic athlete who decided that if I don't win gold, I shouldn't live, right? Well, maybe if they had some lessons along the way, some adversity, things to work through and all that kind of stuff, they would have recognized that it's a process, right? It's not a point in time that ends all. It's a process of moving forward. So I think as a parent, the hardest thing for me is to watch my kids struggle and not want to jump in and solve it, right? But when we do, we make them weaker, right? There's this idea, you probably heard of it, of anti-fragile, right? It's this idea of you have to go through adversity to get strong. There's no other way around it. It's like getting a callus on your elbow. The more that it rubs up against that surface, it's going to build up so that it doesn't hurt. Why do we take vaccines, right? Why do we put bad stuff in us so that it will grow and then fight off the bad stuff? Yep. Well, because we need to be able to fight off that bad stuff, right? So the hardest part about a parent is let them struggle. Don't solve everything for them. Let them work through it, guide them, help them, consult with them, let them vent, right? But let them work through it, and you're going to have amazing people on the other end of it. And I'm telling you, we're terrible at it as parents. And when it comes to, by the way, I just got all these compliments about you. I'm so proud. And now I'm not hearing those compliments, right? So I need to fix things. It becomes a real bad mess.
We talked about parents now. I would just quick also touch on the coaches in junior hockey or like kids hockey and everything. And you see a lot of different styles of coaches, different personalities of coaches. But I sometimes a feeling that you see coaches, they coach 13, 12-year-olds, and the coaches behave like they're NHL coaches. Like they this attitude, and they're dealing with kids who don't have yet the developed solid personality. What are the biggest no-goes you see or biggest mistakes that you observe with this coaches on like kids or junior level?
Well, you think of the coach as being up here and all the players being down here, and that's how we're going to plow through this season. But at the end of the day, it's all the players up here and the coach down here is how we're going to pursue the season. And the problem is when you have the coach as the spotlight, right, then their failures is the coach's failures. Their struggles is the coach's struggles. Their successes are the coach's successes. And it's not about the coach. The coach is there to serve, right? The coach is there to make these players better. And at different levels, right? So if you're talking about youth sports, it's about fun, right? When I say youth, I'm saying, 8, 9, 10, 11, those age groups. Yes. Well, you better be having a lot of fun, right? If it starts getting ugly and uncomfortable and frustrating at those levels, there ain't no way they're ever going to make it to the higher levels. No way in the world. So as a coach, as a parent, you got to make sure it's fun. That's your focus. Fun, 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 right? And now we're getting up into those 13, 14, 15, 16. Now it's got to be about development. How good can you get? How hard can you work, right? Let's see what your potential looks like as we start to compare you to everybody else. So it has to be all about development. And we want it to be fun. We don't take away the fun, but it's now fun and development, right? And there's development down here, of course, but I'm not going to beat you because you aren't a great skater. Yeah. And then when you get up to the higher ranks, and especially when it comes to pro is about winning, period, right? High elite levels is about winning and development. So there's a combination thing going on there. And it's when that line between winning and development sort of gets lost, or maybe there's a certain personality style of the coach that, again, his worth is whether they're winning or losing. If you're not playing good, you're out of here. I don't care if that hurt you or if that broke you or anything like that. I got to win, damn it. Right. So it's managing that line. And then, of course, when it talks pros, I don't even pretend like it's about development. You have some coaches who are, of course, developing men. And I appreciate that, men and women towards, what are you going to do the rest of your life? But at the end of the day, it really is about winning. You don't win, then you're going to be shuffled or something's going to happen. But that's all the way up there. We're so far from that, right? Let's focus on development. And so again, it comes back to clarity of purpose. I know I'm going to beat these foundations into the ground, but clarity of purpose, right? Why are we doing this? What is my role? What is the thing that I'm trying to accomplish, right? If I know that, if I can articulate that, maybe I've even written it on something and shared it with parents to say, this is my intention for the season. That's awesome. But let's go back to it, right? And then awareness is what's really happening, what's happening out there in the reality, what's, external awareness and internal awareness. How am I feeling? What am I catching myself doing? I'm constantly pissed off with the parents. I don't want to talk to them at all. So now I've made rules about this one's a jerk and this one doesn't listen and this one is clueless and this. So I've made all these judgments about people. So now I can't barely even carry on a conversation because I've already decided about them, right? Well, they're still their kids. You still got to be able to have a conversation. So now it's expectations, right? It's rules, it's beliefs about how people are and how things should be. Are they clashing? And if so, that's where we need to go to fix it. Right? Not just shut you off or me quit. It's we've got to figure out. Again, it comes back to the foundations of clarity of purpose, awareness, and mindset.
You mentioned when you go on pro level, it's all about winning, and I agree on that. Or when you go on elite level, more or less, it's also about winning. So when you have like young players, like 18, 19-year-olds, and they get pro contracts, would it be better sometimes to wait a little bit longer until they develop, if they get until they're like 20, 21 maybe, to be mentally stronger and jump then into the pro level? Or because that's the thing, maybe an 18-year-old cannot handle after if he's benched or something, because I don't know. Yeah.
Well, no, you're it's really important, this whole idea of development, and not some kids are ready, right? I watched Cale Makar, he's a defenseman for the Avalanche, come out of a NCAA championship game. They lost, but it was the last game of the season. They lost. He was defenseman. The next day he went to the Avalanche. He was signed, but now he's actually on the ice during playoffs, and he gets a point in his first game. And he's been a stellar defenseman in the NHL since that time. I mean, just instantly. So to say nobody can, I would say that's probably inaccurate. To say that many can't, I think that is accurate. And that's where it comes down to the organization, right? How is the organization treating these assets, right? Because that's what's making my business run, are these players that we're developing. So if I'm not very good, if I'm burning people out, if I'm putting them in situations that there's no chance of winning, and I've crushed their confidence and just burn them out, then I'm burning up assets for my business. So you got to hope that you've got a GM, that you got a coach, that you got a philosophy as an organization to treat these assets as individuals and giving them what they need. And they all need a little bit. They need the same things, but they need it in a little bit different ways. And so the best coaches, the best GMs, they get it. They understand. It's not just about grabbing the best player. It's about grabbing the best player for your team, for your situation, right? Somebody that you have the ability to develop. And that's what's really hard, I think, about the scouting, is that sometimes you literally do grab the player that has the best stats. Yeah. And they always say, grab the best player. If it's your turn to pick, grab the best player. Well, I say, grab the best player that you can make better, right? Not just the best player. And you're starting to see that now. Quite honestly, I've got some friends that are in the draft and scouting and all that kind of stuff. And they'll tell me, they say, Kevin, that the mental makeup of these players has become so much more important over the years than the physical, because the physical stuff we're good at. We are really good at developing these skills. We are great at that. The mental stuff, man, we're just figuring it out. We're guessing. We don't really have expertise. A lot of times we're wrong. First impressions, we're wrong. That's where we need help. And that's where I think, and this is what gets me excited about hockey specifically, but sports in general, and that is that the physical training, the physical trainer, has got to be there for them to help them wrap knees and all that. But I think we need that mental game coach too, to work through some of these things that they're struggling with. And again, it's teach them awareness. You lost an important game. Now you're shut down. You're not even talking to your wife. You're ignoring your kids. You've been locked in this spot for weeks, right? That's not good, right? We need to, that shouldn't even have happened, but we need to not let that ruin your life, right? So it's all of that comes together. And I think hopefully we'll see more and more of it.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of psychological coaching, mental coaching, performance coaching in the mental thing. And would you recommend to parents of young athletes to get a mental or performance psychologist for their kids?
Yeah. So that's my mission. That's the mission that I'm on, is that I think all youth sports should have a level of mental training as they're coming up, right? Because if having fun is the most important thing in the early years, then tell them, have fun. That's the most important thing. Yes, I'd love for you to get a goal. Yes, I'd love for you to be on a winning team and all that. But I really want you to have fun. If we have fun this season, we've been successful. So tell them that, right? And if development is the most important thing, say, I will be pushing you. I don't think you're as good as you can be. And I'm going to show you how good you can be. So when I'm yelling and when I'm pushing you, it's not because I'm a big jerk. It's because this is the year for development. Tell them that, right? And when they say, but I don't want to mess up, and you look at them and you say, why? How are you going to get better? If you don't mess up, you can't see what you need to work on. And if you don't work on it, you won't get better. I want you to mess up. I need you to mess up. Now, there are certain times when I'd rather you not, right? Such as in high stakes games and stuff like that. And there are times when I literally expect you to be making mistakes. And that's why we practice so much. Push yourself, work hard, right? Get out of that comfort zone in practice. But when it comes to games, if you want to stay inside that core skill set that you have so you can play fast and intense, go for it. The whole team will be better if you stay within that absolute core set, because we'll minimize mistakes. You'll be your very, very best. And if all the team does that, we're great. But if we're not better at the end of the season as we were in the beginning because we didn't work hard in practice, then it was a fail, right? Because we got to get better. And then, of course, you don't have to tell anybody about winning, how important it is. Typically, their paychecks and their spot on the team is decided by that. So, yeah, it's about. I think there should be a level of mental game training throughout youth sports. There's no mandatory. There's no requirements, and because that we don't do anything. Oh. And now what happens is these kids run into the wall. These kids are ready to quit. These kids are struggling. Parents are frustrated, coaches are frustrated because we've got all this, fire going on and we got to fix it. So let's jump in there and fix it. Okay, well, we can fix some things, but how are we going to keep it from happening again? Right? How do we keep it from happening again? So yes, to answer your questions, everybody should have access to a mental game coach. And fortunately, there are more and more out there. When I did this 20 years ago, you were either a high-end psychologist working for a professional team and had your own practice, or that was it. There wasn't anything in between. And I don't think you have to be, a renowned psychologist to help a young team get the most out of their skill and their performance. So, but I also think having somebody to work with is great, but having training that you are required to go through, I think is important. And we do it in certain areas. I know Team Canada has a lot of training. I know USA Hockey has a lot of training. I suspect that you guys have training, very specific levels of training. But when you look at it, if you ever break it down, the mental game training is one little bullet, right? And then there's all this other stuff. So that tells you right there that it's there, but it's still a low priority. We got to increase the importance of it. One of best things I ever saw was when the Washington Caps won the Stanley Cup and they interviewed Braden Holtby. The first person he thanked was his psychologist. He didn't say anything else. He says, first and foremost, I want to thank my psychologist. And I was like, yeah, way to go, way to go.
That's great. So you just said now it's very important to have a mental game coach, a psychologist on your side. So if somebody wants to contact you, is that possible, and what do they have to do to get in contact with you?
Best place to do is I have a website called The Complete Player, no spaces, thecompleteplayer.com. That'll get you started. I've got all kinds of programs and workbooks, and like I said, I'm working on one now called the Compete Formula, and that's exciting because again, I mentioned some core areas. Competitiveness, that compete level, I think is becoming more and more important. And then the effectiveness of expectation management, stuff like that, is huge. So I'm going to probably do something in that. I have awareness training that I've done. I've got a really cool site called Zen Hockey, Zen hockey.com, which it's free. You sign up and there's all these different mindful sessions that I do that are mostly around hockey, sort of has that hockey vibe. So it's not just your typical mindful training, but it teaches you how to do it, explains it. And then of course you can, go into a bigger training if you wanted to. And of course I work with, individuals one-on-one all the time. So thecompleteplayer.com is where, and I'll make sure that you have links to this. You mentioned the parents. I have a workbook called The Ultimate Hockey Parent. I'll make sure there's a link. People can download that. And any other links that they have. But at the end of the day, what I would love to see is that people recognize how important the mental parts of the game are to a player. If I ever do a workshop or have a presentation or something, I always ask, what do we think the breakdown between the physical part of the game and the mental part of the game? And I hear everything, 80% mental, 70% mental, 90% mental. Nobody ever goes below 50. So I'll just take the lowest number. So let's just say it's 50% of the game. It's half the game. Well, then I asked them, okay, so how much training have you done in this area? No. How much time? How many books have you read? How many coaches have you worked with in this area? No. And they just sort of look at me embarrassed going, none, zero, right? So you're saying it's half your game and you've done nothing. Right. Of course, I preface it. Well, how much time do you spend on the ice practicing and driving and all that? And they'll say, 17 hours a week, 26 hours a week, because, when you're into hockey, you're into hockey. And then I ask about how much time do you do the mental? And they go, I don't know how to answer that. So we got to change that. If we all admit that it's at least 50% of the game, then step up, start using some of these materials that are available. invest in your player, right? So that you really are getting everything out of them. And watch their performance soon. I've never had anybody come back and say, that totally wasn't worth it. I'm a worse player. I feel more depressed. I'm in a worse spot than I ever was because I worked with you. Never happened. It's never happened. Thank God. I'm knock on wood. Everybody gets something out of this, whether it's, just a few sessions, whether we work together all season. It's an amazing transformation that you see in these players. And certainly for them personally, think about somebody who's enjoying it, who's confident in their abilities, who is striving for greatness, right? Instead of terrified, worried about making a mistake, hoping they don't lose, right? And each is happening every single day, right? Both of those scenarios are happening every single day. I would want my kid on the other side where they're appreciating it and having a blast.
So do you also do virtual?
Yes. Yeah.
So somebody also from Europe could contact you.
Yeah,
and you could do that by Zoom or something.
We can do workshops. I do live workshops. COVID was such a horrible thing. But one thing it did do is it taught hockey coaches and the hockey family that I can learn online. I can learn through a virtual meeting. It was really hard before that because they wanted you to show up, be standing in front of these kids in a locker room to be able to convey that message. And I could only get to so many places. But now that we can do it by setting up a screen in the locker room and me jumping in and talking to a team for an hour about a particular topic, I can do that anywhere in the world. And I think that is so exciting. So absolutely, we're taking advantage of all the technology and all the ability to communicate for sure.
Okay, cool. And if somebody would contact you who is not a hockey player, like a soccer player or weightlifter or whatever, that's also possible.
100%. Yeah. As a matter of fact, my compete program is all sport, right? It's about all sports. I've got what I call a 30-day challenge, 30-day mental toughness challenge, very hockey specific, but it's a sprint from day 1 to day 30, teaching them 30, different mental skills. So those kinds of things. I've got workbooks that people can listen to. I'm converting those to audios because kids can put their headphones in and on the way to practice be listening to, a audio book about confidence or about, busting out of a slump or anything, motivation, whatever. So that all of those things are available now. And of course, courses where you literally go through a module and you learn and then you do an exercise and then you go away and you come back and do it again. These are very well organized, defined courses that people can go through. But it's really, those types of things, it's really on the player to be disciplined to actually do it. Because it's not going to work if you say, oh, no, I've got this really cool stuff. I'll get to it when, I don't know how many times you see people will buy a book and they say, oh, I have the book. Well, because I have the book, I have the potential to learn what's in this book. So here, let me put it on the shelf. And guess what? I never touched it again, right? It doesn't work unless you use it. And so that's what I preach all the time.
Yes, that's so true. Hey, thanks a lot, Kevin. I love to talk with you. It's very interesting. And I wish you all the best. And in the future, hope we stay in contact. I really like the talk we had. And I think it was a lot of important stuff. And I hope the listeners are going to appreciate it too. And I hope many of my listeners are going to contact you or download courses or the stuff you offer. So thanks a lot.
I appreciate you doing what you do. I think there are more people that do what you do that highlight how this works and why it's important, how easy it technically is to get access to. But if you don't know it's there, you don't know it's there, right? So I appreciate you being out there and sharing the word and spreading the word and letting people know that, hey, if you are committed to being the best you can be, reaching your potential, working through all of the challenges that life throws in your way, which is what you talk about, then start right here. So I'm loving your podcast. I've been watching and listening to episodes. It's hard when it's not in my language, but I still try. So, and one of the things that you and I talked about too is I would like to make more of my stuff available internationally. And so I think that there's a good opportunity to even spread beyond that. So thank you for that. Thank you for reaching out. And I look forward to staying in touch.
So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the show. For further information, go to my website, www.muellermatthias.ch. You'll find all the remaining 88 episodes of the podcast The Stoic Pirate, and also the links to Kevin's websites and to his book. Buy it and read it. So go to my website www.muellermatthias.ch, Mueller with UE and Matthias with 1 T and H. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care and come back aboard the ship of the Stoic Pirate.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of the Stoic Pirate. Come back again to our quest for the treasure of the good life.